Hello and welcome back to anyone and everyone watching. Today I'm going to be talking about the ARCA Menards series, and specifically how after multiple years of steady declinement, it might be on the verge of a comeback. All the way back in 1953, just 5 years after the founding of NASCAR, John Markham brought the popular Southeastern phenomenon up north under the branding of the Midwest Association for Race Cars. The MARC series saw success immediately, but as it competed outside of NASCAR's market, it could hardly have been considered a competitor. In fact, Markham and NASCAR founder Bill France Sr. were friends, and in 1964, Bill invited Markham to bring his racing series to that year's Daytona Speed Weeks as a sort of warm-up act before the Daytona 500. That same year, the MARC series changed its name to embrace its new intended national reach as the Automobile Racing Club of America, or ARCA. From then on, ARCA would continue to open its season at Daytona alongside NASCAR and would go on to share many more weekends with them throughout their season. But still, the majority of the ARCA schedule remained on the short tracks across the U.S. that NASCAR looked past, such as Five Flags Speedway, Flat Rock Speedway, and the Illinois State Fairgrounds. Eventually, ARCA reached its peak, which coincided with the peak of NASCAR in around the late 90s and early 2000s. In those years, ARCA's average field size hovered around 35 cars per race, each with a wide variety of series regulars, cup leeches, and up-and-coming teenage drivers that gave ARCA its own personality. And from around that time and onward, ARCA became the unofficial fourth step down of the NASCAR ladder right below the Truck Series, and it was more or less viewed as a necessary step for young drivers that wanted to progress into NASCAR. But aside from the select group of well-funded and often young drivers racing for big teams, ARCA has never really been a series of full-time championship-seeking drivers, but rather a series made to be affordable so that the common man can buy his own equipment and race whenever he can. As you can see from the data I've compiled here from the year 2000 through 2022, there's never been an ARCA season even before then with over 15 full-time drivers. And from the small pool of full-time drivers, it's not often that more than a handful of them will enter the season with any realistic shot of winning the championship. All that is just to say that the number of full-time drivers within reason is not critical to the success of ARCA, but rather the other two lines you see, the number of drivers who competed in at least half the races, whom I'll call the consistent part-timers, and the average field size per season are much more significant. As you can see, at least in these two categories, ARCA was at a clear peak from around 2005 to 2008, with at least 23 consistent part-time drivers and an average of over 38 drivers at every race, big or small. At ARCA's ultimate height of field size in 2006, every single one of the 23 races not only featured a max car count, but multiple DNQs. For example, in the first two races of that season, a staggering 27 drivers failed to make each race. The entry lists for both races were 65.9% over capacity. What's even more wild is that these absurdly large entry lists hardly let off as the year went on, because overall that year, 8.7 drivers failed to qualify per race. Needless to say, that trend did not carry on for many more years. While average car counts in ARCA continued at around 35 per race until 2012, in 2013 they took a seemingly small but statistically significant dip to around 30 per race. The reason for that could be attributed to a variety of things, but after much research, I believe it to mainly be a combination of decreasing prize money and the decreasing popularity of stock car racing in general. But though you wouldn't realize it by the numbers, 2015 was easily the most detrimental year to the future of ARCA. It started out as just an equipment gap with the introduction of both the new Ilmore 396 engine package and the new Gen 6 Cup car-based composite bodies. These changes were obviously met with criticism from some fans and small teams alike due to the added expense they brought on, but they weren't a total deal-breaker either. That's because at first, both were optional upgrades, and the new composite bodies were only allowed on tracks 1 mile or shorter in length. Or in other words, tracks where any aero differences between the old and new bodies would be more or less negligible. In fact, the first two races at which the composite bodies were permitted were both won by that year's eventual champion, Grant Enfinger. Enfinger went on to win 4 more races that year, all in the old steel body cars, and was uncontested in the title hunt, as second place Austin Wayne Self came up over 400 points short. Still, the writing was obviously on the wall for the old car bodies and the old engines especially. Every team knew heading into the 2015 season that if they wanted any shot at winning, they would need to cave in and purchase the new engine. Not because the old engines were that inferior, but because ARCA began limiting their horsepower in order to brute force them out of relevancy. And ARCA succeeded, as every single race from the introduction of the new engines and onward was won by an Ilmor engine-running team. But at what cost? According to ARCA themselves, the new engine package was made to standardize performance and costs across the series, similar to the goal of NASCAR with the Gen 7 car. But the catch was, of course, that many of the smaller teams could not afford such standardized costs. On top of that, the composite body cars became more and more standard in the years following their introduction, up until 2018 when ARCA mandated them as superspeedways, and finally for all races in 2020. So what did all the teams that couldn't afford these changes do, you might ask? Well, they left. Many of the underfunded family teams and consistent part-timers, as I coined them in the beginning of the video, slowly faded out of the series as the years went on. In 2015, there was still a statistically average number of drivers competing in at least half the races, with 20 total, but that number steadily dropped to a 21st century low of 12 in both 2020 and 2021. Along with that stat, the average car count per race fell off even harder, from 31.4 cars per race in 2015 to a rather embarrassing low of 19.6 in 2020. Oh yeah, and there were only 2 full-time drivers who competed in every race in 2021, Ty Gibbs and Corey Hine, both of whom drove for powerhouse teams. With all that said, coupled with the implications of COVID in 2020, it's no wonder that many of the smaller ARCA races in the past few years have featured sub-20 and sometimes even sub-15 car lineups that have made the series turn into a running joke online. Races such as the 2020 Toyota 200 at Winchester and, Lord have mercy, the 2021 Southern Illinois 100 at the DuQuoin State Fairgrounds have taken over as the new stereotype for ARCA. As though they are the extreme examples, they bear the 3 worst characteristics of modern ARCA: underwhelming field sizes, little to no passing, and well-funded teenage drivers winning everything. Even the old ARCA brakes term, which referred to the inexperienced drivers being unable to avoid crashes, has somewhat faded away because the racing is so spread out on the mile and a halves, and even on the short tracks, that there's really no one to run into. Well, most of the time. But is there any hope for the ARCA Menards series? Following this past season, and from what we've seen so far in 2023, I would answer yes. In 2022, numbers were up across the board as full-time drivers increased from 2 to 7, half-schedule or more drivers increased from 12 to 15, and most importantly, the average car count increased from 22.2 to 25.1. It was certainly an improvement, but at the time, it could have easily been written off, and the racing product remained rather stale. Additionally, though there was a good variety of winners, all but one race was won by the 4 top ARCA teams: Kyle Busch Motorsports, David Gilliland Racing, Rev Racing, and Venturini Motorsports. All in all, it was a pretty standard, dare I even say good season, and in comparison to the 2 years prior, it was a much-needed change of pace for the declining series. Over the 2022 to 2023 offseason, there were quite a few notable changes in the driver and team lineups. The most notable, of course, was that Frankie Muniz, a well-known actor with a background in sports car racing, would be taking over the number 30 Rhett Jones racing car full-time. As Frankie has over 340,000 followers on Twitter and over 740,000 on Instagram, his presence in the series alone would bring loads of new exposure to ARCA. Additionally, the top Ford team, David Gilliland Racing, and one of the top Chevy teams, GMS Racing, announced they would be both suspending their operations in the series and selling most of their equipment. Both teams reasonably saw no future for themselves in ARCA, given its quick decline, and that according to many sources, the cost of running a top ARCA team is nearly equal to that of a top Truck Series team, except with much less return on investment. No matter, the exit of those 2 teams might have been a blessing in disguise for ARCA, because there were plenty of previous part-time teams or completely new teams interested in taking their place, including AM Racing, Veer Motorsports, and Tamayo Cosentino Racing. Now in 2023, ARCA has a whole different feel, as the many underfunded and family-run teams will once again be in contention for wins week in and week out, therefore giving the ARCA Menards series back its niche that it fit into so well back during its peak. While the Joe Gibbs and Rev Racing entries and all 3 Venturini cars will still have a leg up over the rest of the field in regard to their equipment and funding, all 3 of those remaining ARCA powerhouses are in a bit of an awkward state this year. In fact, heading into the season, the only primary driver for any of those teams who had previously won a race was Venturini's Jesse Love. Not only that, but in the opening race at Daytona, Jesse was also the only driver in the 40-car field with a series win. All that inexperience opened the doors wide open for a huge underdog story, such as that when the self-made 41-year-old Greg Van Alst drove his number 35 car to the win and summed up his victory perfectly in the post-race interview, saying, "Guys like me aren't supposed to do this." In the next race at Phoenix, and as of this recording, the most recent ARCA race, the underdogs prevailed again, as 4 out of the top 5 finishers, including the 15-year-old winner Tyler Reif, were competing for small part-time teams. So, with all that said, I think it is pretty clear the ARCA Menards series is due for a great 2023 season. The increased field sizes from 2022 will likely stabilize this year, or even increase again, and with many small family-run teams taking the place of NASCAR powerhouses, fans will once again be able to relate to the drivers and have a reason to tune into the races. Furthermore, with most of the remaining big teams going through a year of transition with inexperienced rookie drivers, the competition gap will be even smaller for the rest of the season. It will likely see many more action-packed races like Daytona and Phoenix, as opposed to complete Joe Gibbs Racing or Venturini Motorsports domination. And due to the increasing cost to run an ARCA team, I see no reason for any more NASCAR teams to expand into ARCA in the foreseeable future, which, as the years go on, will continue to give this series back the niche that caused its peak back in the late 90s and early 2000s. But that's all I've got to say for today. I'm curious to know if any of you guys will be following the ARCA season this year, so please let me know down in the comments why or why not. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more videos just like these. I've been extremely busy in college recently, so that's why I've not uploaded in around 3 weeks now, but I'll try to get back on my once per week upload schedule, and for sure once summer rolls around, you can expect twice weekly uploads at least. But yeah, that's all, so until next time, peace out.